Hi, this is Ike Ellis, and you are here for a Wintellect webinar called A Lap Around Microsoft's Business Intelligence Platform. And I hope everyone can hear me because I can't hear you. So if you can hear me and you see a chat window, can you just say, yes, I can hear you, and yes, I see the slide screen. That'd be great. And then, can everybody see it? I don't see anybody typing. I'll ask you, Rachel, can you see the screen? And can you hear me? Yes, yes. Okay, great. All right. So you're in the right place if what you want to do is learn about the different elements in an average business intelligence project and all of the different products that Microsoft has that might fit some of those elements. So if you're like me, you've seen Microsoft continue to release product after product after product, and unless you were keeping up, it was very easy to get overwhelmed about, like, well, there seems to be 3 or maybe 4 different reporting tools. Which reporting tool is the right one for me? Or there seems to be a couple different tools that let me create ETL packages. Which one's the right one for me? So this session seeks to introduce you to the wide range of tooling and products that are available to you on the Microsoft platform, with a little bit of an emphasis in Azure, so a little bit of emphasis on the cloud products, and Power BI, which is also primarily a cloud product, but has changed in the most recent releases. But we'll also talk about on-premise too, and particularly the history of on-premise and the new additions to on-premise, which have been very helpful in most BI projects. So if you say that the purpose of business intelligence, in my opinion, the purpose of business intelligence is to give the right data to the right people at the right time, which means that we want to help decision makers make decisions, or analysts explore data, or managers know what to do next on their work item list. So, or maybe we want to tell customers what their customer balance is, right? Or we want to tell a vendor when they're behind in shipping to us. So all of those things could be elements of a successful business intelligence project. And if you took, let's say that the CEO comes to us and she says, look, I want to tell the vendors when they're behind on shipping data to us. And you look at everything you have to do. You have to, like, grab the data that we need. You might have to clean it. You might have to store it someplace. You might have to create reporting artifacts or a dashboard. You might have to do some error reporting in case there's bad data. And you say, okay, I can get this project done in 4 weeks, right? 80% of the time of that project will be spent in ETL, and extract, transform, and load processes, which is like grabbing the data from a data source, cleaning it or manipulating it in some fashion, and then loading it into a data destination. And that's true in IT, but it's also true if you're an analyst. So if your boss comes to you and she says, hey, tell me every vendor that's behind in shipping to us, and you have access to all the data, and you just love Excel, and you love Power BI, and you've got this tooling available to you, you might even be good in R or some of the data science languages, or Python. If you ask the average data scientist how long it takes them to get a project done, they would say, well, it takes 2 or 3 days, but I spend 2.5 of those days cleaning the data. So same thing, right? Whether it's ETL or cleaning, it's a time-consuming process. So you're going to see a lot of products here today that focus on making that part easier for you. And we'll talk about what each one of those products do and their position. So, okay, so if you look at the diagram that you've got in front of the board, you'll see that we've organized the different products into 4 main categories. The first one is prepping data, which is what I just talked about, which is, we're going to clean the data somehow. Using data, which is either I'm a decision maker and I want it in a dashboard, or I'm a frontline manager and I just want it in an Excel spreadsheet, or I'm an analyst and I want to be able to explore it with Power BI. That any type of using it, right? Other products that didn't really fit into any of the specific categories, but were still kind of important to discuss so that we could include them in the BI ecosystem. And then big data elements, like what happens when we have a huge data set and our normal tools that we were using before just aren't fast enough for what we're doing? What can we do to get some help when the data is so big that we just need to shrink it down to something that's a little more manageable? And I'll show you some tools we have there, particularly with Azure. So the way the tools that I'm going to talk about are broke down is, in prepping data, we have two main tools. One's called SSIS and the other one's called Azure Data Factory, but also HDInsight kind of also falls into prepping data, and I'll discuss that. Under using data, we're going to talk about the three main Microsoft products, which is Excel, Power BI, and SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Services. Under our other products, we're going to talk about Azure Analysis Services, manually aggregating tables using a SQL Server tool called Column Store Indexing, Master Data Services, and Data Quality Services. And then finally, with our big data elements, we'll talk about HDInsight, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and Azure Data Lake. So I'm going to tell you the tool, tell you what it's good for, and show you it. So if you've never seen these tools, this might be a good brief introduction to it. If you have seen the tool, but you're excited about something else, just check some social media app or something while I'm talking about SSIS, and check back in as I talk about Azure Data Factory, which might be something that you haven't seen before. So SSIS stands for SQL Server Integration Services, and it is an ETL tool that we have had from Microsoft for about 12 years now, maybe 13 years. So we've had it for a long time. It is very versatile. One, it's been around for so long and it's gone through so many revisions that it's very mature. And so we know that SSIS has the capability to grab data from literally anywhere, manipulate it, pretty much do anything you want to do with the data, and put it anywhere. So that's kind of a bold statement, but SQL Server Integration Services doesn't actually have to have SQL Server anywhere part of the pipeline for moving data around. That's what we're talking about, is moving and cleaning data. And we don't have to take data from SQL Server or put it in SQL Server. We can, for instance, with SSIS, grab data from a CSV and clean it and then put it into Oracle if we want, and still use the same tool and still use the exact same design patterns that we would use if we were going to have SQL Server involved in it. Unfortunately, though, SQL Server Integration Services is not available as an Azure product that's packaged. You can, however, install it on an Azure virtual machine, which means that you provision a virtual machine in the size that you want with the CPU and memory that you want. You pay, hourly by month for it, and then once you install SQL Server Integration Services on it, you run it and play with it there. And there are a lot of third-party add-ins for it. There are like 5, 6, 7 different companies that are selling add-ins for it. So if it doesn't come with the component that you want, chances are somebody else has already thought of it and it's easy to install. I use add-ins from Cozy Rock and from several other vendors, including Microsoft has made their own add-ins for it that don't come packaged with SSIS. But it allows you to pull data from SAP, Salesforce, all sorts of different data sources. If you can think about it, you can take care of it. So with that, let's just go ahead and take a look at SSIS. So I've got first of all, SSIS packages are done in, SSIS packages are done in Visual Studio. So if we want to create an SSIS package, we first create an SSIS project, and the way we do that is we just click File. I'm going to do Add so you can see the dialog, but it would mostly be New, Project. And then once we have to install a tool called SQL Server Data Tools, and it is an add-in for Visual Studio. Now, one thing, you don't have to pay for Visual Studio if you're only using it for business intelligence. So if you're not writing C#, if you're not writing production code, you don't have to be licensed for this. You can just download it for free. If you just go into Chrome, or I should say Edge, but whatever, and just say download SSDT from here, you can download all the tools that you're about to see me use for the next, like, half hour or so. So here, you would say, click on integration services, and it's an integration services project. That's what I'm in right now. And rather than go through and do that because I'm on limited time, this is an integration services project here. And you can see that I can create connections to specific data stores, or I can just create a package. And that's what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say, hey, create a new SSIS package. I could call this package anything I wanted. I could say, hey, this is my customer ETL package. And now there are two main tabs in SSIS, a control flow tab and a data flow tab. Control flow is probably more properly control of flow, right? Like if statements and looping and things like that. So this would be like if I needed to execute a process or like an EXE or a PowerShell script or something before I did major ETL, or maybe I needed to download something from FTP, I would put that on control flow tab. And then it's just a typical workflow. So if I said, hey, this thing needs to run, and this is my like truncate table, and then I want to do a data flow after that. And data flow is actually piping data from one place to another. So that's my little workflow. Please truncate the table and then pipe the data. Now, if I double click on this data flow task, it changes tabs from control flow to data flow. And this allows me to pick a data source. So I can have my data source here, and it could be SQL or Excel or a flat file or Oracle. If I click on new, it can be a lot more than that, right? Here's the jet provider for access, and you know, any ODBC client can be imported here. So and you can add custom ones here. The Attunity makes a different Oracle driver that we can use. There's Postgres drivers and MySQL drivers, but we'll just stay with SQL for simplicity. And I'll say, hey, this is localhost, and what database do I want to use? Can you see this, by the way? Can everybody see this? I can say I want to use the worldwide importer database. And if I click test connection, it succeeds. I click OK. I click OK again. And now this is my, oh, hang on one second. Did I choose a table? I didn't. So here I can say, oh, please grab my application.people table. That's fine. And we just say, this is people source. And then if I want a destination, I can take the destination assistant, drag it here. I can create a new destination, and I will do that. So we'll say this is localhost, and the database that we want, we could say we want AdventureWorks DW. And I grab people source and I drag it down here, and it says, okay, what table do you want to do? I'll do a new table. And the new table, I'll call it Ike people. Click OK. And now here are the mappings. And what this is doing is it's saying, from your source columns, I am mapping all of these columns to your destination table, and click OK. Okay, so now my data flow is created. I'm just going to get rid of that truncate table for right now because I don't really need it. And now if I want to run customer ETL, I just right-click and execute the package. And while it's running, if it's a lot of data, I can double-click and I can watch the data pipe. In this case, it's 1,100 rows because we didn't want to, sit here and watch a million rows. But you can watch the data pipe as it goes through the ETL process. Now, in the middle of having a data source and a data destination, I can also, let me bring my toolbox up again. Uh-oh, my SSIS toolbox. I can do all sorts of things in the middle here. I can merge data together. I can merge multiple columns into one column. I can merge multiple tables into one table. I can convert data types. I can split a table into two tables if I want to. I can create custom aggregates. So there's a lot. I can create custom scripts, and that script can do anything I want. Like if I wanted to do some calculation like 13-month rolling month or something like that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do inside SSIS. It's very, very powerful. And then I can deploy it and schedule it using SQL Server Agent. So that is the basics here of SSIS. Let's go back to the slides real quick. So the next tool is an Azure Platform as a Service tool called Azure Data Factory. And if you've listened to Microsoft the marketing about it, they've said this is the cloud version of SSIS. They've actually repeated that, and honestly, that isn't true. And I think recently they've kind of changed how they branded this, because really Azure Data Factory is really good at taking data that's changing, a massive amount of data that's changing, and orchestrating it to go through multiple processes before it arrives at its destination. And it can orchestrate data from a lot of places, and it can, like, it could run Hive jobs if necessary from Hadoop, or it can run different C# scripts or PowerShell scripts, and you can schedule those things to run. But if you're looking at Azure Data Factory as a replacement to SSIS, you're going to be disappointed, because it's difficult to debug when there's a problem. The step through is non-existent. The logging and error logging is sometimes not adequate. It's hard to run the packages manually. And if you wanted to have a professional development shop where you're having, like, hey, we develop on this server and then we promote it to test on this server, and then from there we promote to production, like, you know, what you're supposed to do, use source control and things like that, you'll find that that's next to impossible to do with Azure Data Factory. So not super fun to work with yet, and I have hope for it that it'll be much, much better. But it is good that we have a platform as a service offering, and I think it's going to mature a lot. They are putting a lot of money into it. Just to show it to you really quickly, let's, for the first time, go into Chrome. And here's my Azure dashboard, and I've created a Data Factory demo here called ADF Demo for Data Factory. And if you click on Author and Deploy, by the way, Rachel, can you see the Azure platform right now? Can you see my Chrome right now? She's chatting with me through the chat box. Yes, okay, great. So if I wanted to create a link service, I can link to any one of these data stores. Look at this. So I can link to DocumentDB, which just got rebranded to Cosmos DB. I can link to Cassandra and Mongo and Oracle and MySQL and Postgres, and they're all kind of built in here. Amazon Redshift, right? So you can start pulling data from a lot of different places. And then I've created 2 link services already. I've created this Azure SQL link service and Azure Storage. If I click on Storage, you can see that I'm hitting an Azure Storage account to pull blobs from the Azure Storage account. And I'm going to grab a text file from Azure Storage, and I'm going to save it to an Azure SQL database. You can tell that that Azure SQL database is IKEDB. And then in the middle there, what I do is I create a pipeline. And this pipeline looks like this, and it basically says, you know, take it from the blob and grab your input data set. By the way, I've created a couple of data sets. One's called input data set, which tells me exactly what file I want to be working with, and one's called output data set, which tells me what columns and data types for those columns I'll be working with, and the name of the table that I'll be putting it in, which is imp. And then you define a pipeline, and then the pipeline says, take that input data set, that imp.txt file, output it to that imp.table, you know, and then run it every hour and just copy that data from one place to another every hour, right? So then if I go back to my Azure Data Factory page, I can then click on Monitor and Manage, and I can see, you know, the different pipelines and whether or not they're running correctly or not. And this is that input data set and then the output data set going. Okay, the problem is that I can't really run it manually. I have to schedule it to run, and that would mean waiting around for a few minutes, and it's just kind of boring, so we're not going to do that. But just take my word for it, that'll populate a table. Okay, so that's Azure Data Factory. Now we're kind of done with the Microsoft Data Prep tools. I hope you get a sense of which one you would use. I think for right now, I usually use SSIS in an Azure VM or an on-premise SQL Server. And I use Data Factory if I'm pulling data that's a massive amount from unusual data sources that I need to keep current. So now let's talk about using data. The first tool we'll discuss is Power BI, but the 3 tools we're going to talk about are Power BI, Excel, and SQL Server reporting services. So Power BI is great for dashboard creation and visualizations. It's great for self-service BI. If you want to explore data and play around with it, it is great for that. It is very, very easy if you use Power BI, the portal, to share Power BI visualizations. You can host it in the cloud, and you've been able to do that for several years. But just this spring, they've released a way to host Power BI, or they've discussed. I don't know if it's released yet or not, or they've discussed hosting Power BI on-premise. I have to be careful of my NDA, but I know they created a public blog post talking about on-premise Power BI, and I think it did go to beta already, where you can play with it. It's great for mobile, and it also has a product called Power BI Embedded. If you're a custom software shop and you want to create charts and dashboards and interactive data artifacts, you can use this tool and embed it in your application and brand it as part of your application. All of that is very possible. So with that, let me show you Power BI. So I have a sample database, AdventureWorks. I know you guys have seen AdventureWorks before. I'm going to start this tool called Power BI Desktop. And I'm going to create a Power BI visualization right in front of you. This is just from a blank, everything's all blank. I'm not pre-baking the turkey. So if I click Get Data, it says, where do you want to get the data from? I want to get the data from a SQL Server database. I'll click Connect. And it says which one. I'll just say localhost, and I'll import it, and I'll click OK. And it says which database? Well, I want to click from the AdventureWorks DW database. I want to look at fact, internet sales, and I want to look at dim product, and I want to look at dim geography and dim date. We'll say that. And then I click load. Now there's a lot of data in here, but when I click load, you'll see it goes pretty quick. Of course, when I say that, maybe it takes a little longer, but it grabs all that data and throws it into Power BI for use, and it automatically builds the relationships of that data for me. So if you click on modeling and manage relationships, you can see it saw that there were relationships between some of these tables that I pulled in. And now what I can do is, if I know that I care about this extended amount, I want to know how many sales I have. So I click on that, and it gives me a bar chart that's a little bit small. If I want to see the actual number, I can just kind of make it a data card. And that's the number. I know you're thinking, hey, I can't see it. So what we can do is just grow that for you so you can see that I've done, what, $29 million in sales, right? That's right away, that was pretty easy. Now, if I want to create another card and I want to say, okay, which one of my customers give me the most sales? I can say, okay, let's look at that extended amount. And then, or maybe not customer, we might be able to do it by geography. Can I do it by city? No, not yet. So let's do it by customer key. How about that? Oh, one thing that I think we can do is by, how about English month name? That's better. Okay, so by English month, this is how my sales break down per month. And if I want a different card, and I say, okay, I care about that extended amount, and I want to see it by the English product name, and I click there, these are my products that are most important to me. Now, you might have a hard time seeing this, so what I can do is I can click on the artifact, and I can just change a couple things. One is I can turn on data labels so that you can see the different amounts. So if I do data label here, and then the other thing I can do is I can make them bigger if I needed to. But we're not going to, so here, we'll just boom. All right. So what I can do is, if you're seeing, I don't know if you've noticed this, but as I've accidentally clicked on something, this is like a mountain bike right here, and I can see that when I hover over it, I do $1.3 million in that mountain bike 200 black. And if I click on that bar, it automatically changes how much money I do per month so that I can see what that mountain bike does over the course of a year. The other thing that I can do is I can click on an individual month like May, and I can see my product sales. So by default, automatically, these visualizations are linked with each other. So I can create these visualizations based on geography or customer or 15 other things and create a very interactive dashboard experience. I can have heat maps, I can have bar charts, I can have gauges and bullet graphs, and there's all kinds of custom visualizations too. If you come here and you say, hey, give me Power BI custom visuals, these have all been released for free. So this is the blog post. Let's go to, wrong link. It's the custom visual gallery. Let's see. Here they are. So here are all the custom visuals for Power BI, word clouds and Meco charts and KPIs and bullet charts. And so if you have a visualization you want to use, it's really easy to import these. You just download it, import it. You know, the import button, by the way, in Power BI is something that you might have seen here. It's just this button, this ellipsis button, import custom visual, and then boom, you can start using your favorite bullet graph or whatever you want to use. So that's Power BI. Let's go back to the slides. The next using data tool is Excel. Now, you guys all know Excel. We've had this for 30, 40 years now. It's a great tool. It's the gold standard of data analytics. I can't tell you how often I've been into different demos and they always say, this looks like Excel, or this behaves like Excel, or then you can export it to Excel. But even no matter what the data tool is, Excel is going to come up in their demo, and they're going to talk about interacting with it. What's really funny is I've seen CEOs work with and CFOs work with a lot of different tools, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen them bring up some beautiful, fancy $100,000 tool, and the very first thing they do is click, download, and open it up in Excel so they can mess around with it. So Excel is still the #1 tool used for data analysis. It's still the #1 tool for creating data visualizations. And it is great. It sometimes has a bad reputation because people have done things like they've lost their calculations and then they have to go get them back because somebody messed around with something. Or they've, you know, changed an Excel spreadsheet and emailed it around everywhere, and then people are all using the wrong version. They're not using the most up-to-date version of that Excel spreadsheet. Or they used it to store millions of rows, and then they wonder why Excel is failing, is slow. Those are all inappropriate ways to use Excel. These are all problems that have solutions already. The first thing is Excel should never be used as a database, and we should never be storing millions of records there. The second thing is, if we have calculations that we care so much about that if somebody else messes them up, we have outgrown Excel. We should probably be taking those calculations and putting them into a report where you can't mess them up, like SQL Server Reporting Services or Power BI or Analysis Services Cubes, which I'll talk about in just a second. And third, instead of emailing Excel spreadsheets all around, we really should be using SharePoint Online for Excel because it gives us a couple of things. One, we can secure the worksheet. Email, once you give a spreadsheet out through email, who knows what's going to happen with it, right? But if we keep SharePoint as the mechanism for us using the same worksheets, then we can audit it, we can keep track of who's opening it, and we can see how it's evolved over time. If somebody goes in and makes a mistake with Excel, SharePoint allows us to go into an old version and restore it easily without having to restore a backup someplace and all this other stuff that could happen. So Excel is great for visualizations, great for ad hoc analysis, but don't use it as a storage engine. And if you have, it's terrible for printing. And if you have repeatable reports, use it someplace else. Put that in SSRS or someplace else. Now, hold there because I'm going to come back to Excel in just a second. You're going to see it in just a little bit. Let's go to SQL Server Reporting Services. So SSRS is another tool we've had for 15 years. It is one thing that Power BI is very bad at is tabular reports. It's bad for custom sorting, it's bad for real custom colorization like conditional formatting, and it's bad for exporting to PDF or things like that. So SSRS is great for tabular work, and it's great for creating like a sales invoice or any other type of artifact like that. And it's great for repeatable data that people don't typically play with. Maybe they import a couple of parameters and then they get data coming out. And SSRS is actually really easy to work with. So let's go back to our demo here real quick. And in Visual Studio, I have, let me stop that. I have an SSRS project here. And what I can do is just right click on it and add a new report. And it says, welcome to the report wizard. Let's just start here. I could say, yeah, please use my localhost SQL Server. And I could say, please, I want to do work with the worldwide importers database. I can test the connection. That was successful. And I can click OK. Now I click next and it says, oh, and it says, what do you want to work with? And I can say, oh, I want to work with select star from person.person, right? That should work. Uh-oh. Isn't that right? Didn't I thought everything was right. Let's see. Test connection. Yep. Okay. Worldwide importers. Maybe I've got the table wrong. Let's go into worldwide importers real quick and see what table we can use. Oh, how about we use sales.customers? That's better. Okay. So we'll say select star from sales.customers and click next. Boom. And it says, what type of table do we want? For now, we're just going to choose a tabular table. And I'll say, take all these columns and put them in the details portion of the report. And click next, and I'll call this customers, yay, and click finish. Now immediately we get this little static report right here, and it looks pretty nice. And what I can do, like I can do a little formatting, like maybe customer's name needs to be a little wider. And just for fun, I'm going to add an interactive sort into customer name. So interactive sort, dink, enable interactive sorting, and we'll do that on customer name. And we'll click OK. I could add conditional formatting. I can make things colorful. I can drill through to sub-reports. I can drill through to custom applications. There's a lot of power here. If I click preview, here are all of my customers. And if I want to sort them, I just click this little sort button, and it sorts it alphabetically or reverse alphabetically, and it works great. Okay, now here's some power behind SSRS. I can click this little floppy disk. Like, does anybody even know what that is anymore? And I can say, please download it as Excel. And it says, sure, I'll put it on customers, and I'll put it on, we'll put it in C:\SQL backup, because I'll know how to get to that. Now, if I go to that C:\SQL backup, there's my customer spreadsheet. And if I open it up, it looks the exact same, doesn't it? But it's in Excel, and I can manipulate it. SSRS also has a great way of doing subscriptions. I can schedule these reports to be in your email box every day at 5 a.m. So when you wake up, you can have BI for breakfast, right? It's great for approved data. So one good thing about SSRS is really it takes a developer to create it. And so therefore, IT is probably going to create most of the SSRS reports, and you could say, this book of reports are approved by IT to be accurate numbers. That way, you are not constantly asked, why does Fred's spreadsheet not really line up with Sally's spreadsheet? Well, you weren't using approved data. If you were pulling your data from SSRS, they would be the same. Great for users who don't want to be self-motivated. There are a lot of users like that. Lots of export options. Oh, to kind of show you that, by the way, if we go back to SSRS, you can see that I could export to PDF or TIFF or whatever I want. Okay. Next thing, report portal options. So this is something I added later because it is kind of confusing. Report portal means if I have Power BI and I have SSRS and I have Excel and I have random PDFs and I have a bunch of CSVs that get dumped around, and you want to create a portal where users can go and see all of those things collected together. SSRS has a custom report portal that you can use, and that's good for SSRS and Power BI. Power BI has a report portal you can use, and it can also use SSRS and Power BI. So you can kind of decide which one you think empowers your users more for your use case. If your users are more heavily sharing Power BI, you might want to use the Power BI portal. If they're more heavily reliant on IT artifacts, then you might want to use the SSRS portal. SharePoint has been a great portal in the past if it's on-premise because it allows you to use URLs and also link to documents inside SharePoint and create a very nice portal for all use cases. The problem is that SharePoint Online doesn't really integrate with Power BI very well. And so SharePoint Online has lost a little bit of its customization. So as it stands right now, my favorite way to create a portal is I just wrote my own. And I'm hopeful that SharePoint Online will get some of the functionality back that will allow it to securely use outside artifacts that are outside SharePoint Online. Okay, so now we've talked about using data, we've talked about prepping data, and now our next topic will discuss big data. So in big data, we have three main products. We have HDInsight, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and Azure Data Lake. So the first we'll talk about is HDInsight. HDInsight is a Hadoop offering that's platform as a service, which means for as long as you create the Hadoop cluster, you are getting billed for it. And just to kind of show you what that billing looks like, if I go back to my Azure portal and I say, please give me a new HDInsight cluster, and I click HDInsight and it says, oh, this is, Hadoop is a big data service for Apache Hadoop, sorry. And then I click create, and I can keep track of these basic parameters here. But what I want to show you is the custom size real quick. So we'll just call this HDInsight Demo 5, and the cluster type will say we're going to run Hadoop on Linux, and we can create the latest distro and click select. And then, yeah, we'll call it HDI Demo 5 for the resource group, and we'll click next. I'm just kind of going through here because I want to get to the cluster size portion of it. So we'll create an existing storage account connection, keep the default, okay, here. So as you create the number of worker nodes and you specify the type of worker node, it affects your pricing. And this pricing is actually per hour. You probably can't see my screen very well, but it's $3.63 per hour. So if I click on worker node, I can make that a little cheaper by maybe choosing a general purpose, or I can make it more expensive by maybe choosing like a D14, right? If I choose the D14 and select it, now it's $6.71 an hour. So if I could drop it a little bit by saying, no, I only want a 2-node cluster, and now it's $3.81, or I can say, I want a 2-node cluster and I want them to be A3, and now it's $1.38, right? So just be aware that this controls your pricing, and for as long as HDInsight is created, it is charging you. So what you're doing here when you specify your number of worker loads is you're specifying your degree of parallelism. And that degree of parallelism is set at cluster creation. So if you get it wrong, you can always create more worker nodes, or you can create less, but it's time consuming. And if you create too many and you don't need that many, it's very expensive to get that wrong. So you want to be very careful about how many nodes you're creating when you're playing around with HDInsight. It can rack up on you quickly, so just be aware of it. And I don't need this anymore, so I'm carefully backing out. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So, but once you have HDInsight up, you can run Hive and Pig and Spark and Storm and Kafka and all of the famous Hadoop tools that people use. Now, in Hadoop's world, a large reason why people use Hadoop is for ETL, extract, transform, and load. And you might think, well, wait a minute, you talked about SSIS for ETL, and you talked about Azure Data Factory for orchestration. Why would I use Hadoop for this? Well, imagine that you're happily doing your business, right? You've got SQL Server running and everything's running fine, and you're pulling from your 5 different data sources and you're putting it into a data warehouse and everything's perfect. And then all of a sudden somebody comes to you and says, we want to map our sales against weather data, and so we want to import all the data from the National Weather Service to see if weather is affecting our sales at our retail locations. And you think, all the Weather Service data, that's too much. I just want to know 1 reading per day, right? Well, they dump all these CSVs that they're going to put someplace, and now your job is to get the highest reading a day, or maybe the reading from exactly 12 noon. And you've got so much data that SSIS just simply isn't fast enough. Now you might use SSIS in a little bit, but what you'll probably end up doing is dumping all that data into Azure Blob Storage or Azure Data Lake Store, some type of big cloud data platform that won't run out of space and will give you predictable performance. And so you dump all that data in Azure Blob Storage, and then you run Hadoop, Hive, or Pig, or Scoop, and you bring a subset of that data into a bunch of CSVs that you also put in Azure Blob Storage. So you let Hive pare the data down for you. And then once the data is pared down, then you use SSIS to put it into your data warehouse, right? That's a very common way to use Hadoop. Or maybe you need to, like, I need the sales totals. So I've got a ton of individual sales records. I'm going to use Hive or Python or MapReduce to pare all those sales totals down to one total per day. And then I'll use a different tool like SQL to take that data and throw it into a SQL data warehouse or something like that. Okay. So, oh, by the way, just to kind of show you that HDInsight is running, in Chrome, I have Ambari running, and this is like my ability right here. I can create a Hive query right here against HDInsight, and once I create it, I can monitor all of my existing queries that have been ran, and I can rerun other queries and things like that, and that's just Hive. If you click the dashboard, you can see that on my HDI cluster that I've created, I have access to Yarn and to Pig and Scoop and all these other names that you probably think I'm crazy for even talking about. Okay. So the next big data offering is Azure Data Lake. The main difference between Azure Data Lake and HDInsight is Data Lake only charges you while things are running. It doesn't charge you if things are not running. So it's a platform as a service offering that actually behaves more like software as a service. You only get charged per execution. And at the time of this webcast, it's 3 cents per minute per degree of parallelism. So what that means is when you create a job in Azure Data Lake, you specify your degree of parallelism when the job is running. So you can run a job for a minute on 10 nodes, or you could run it for 5 minutes on one node, and you can decide which way you like better, both on whether it's cheap enough or whether it's fast enough. So Azure Data Lake is actually two different products. It's Azure Data Lake Store and it's Azure Data Lake Analytics. Azure Data Lake Store is like a Hadoop distributed file system for the cloud. It's not implemented using HDFS, but it has a web HDFS API over it. What that means is you can store a massive amount of data in Azure Data Lake Store, petabyte of data in Azure Data Lake Store, and because it's using web HDFS, you can expose that data to not only Azure Data Analytics, which I'll talk about in just a second, but also all of the HDInsight products like Hive and MapReduce and Yarn and Storm. So that's great. That means that you've got a very scalable platform as a service offering for straight storage that doesn't charge you on compute. It only charges you for the amount of data that you use. And it charges you per gigabyte. So you could use 10 gigs, you're charged for 10 gigs. You could use 50 tera, you're charged for 50 tera. And it's relatively affordable. Now the second product is Azure Data Lake Analytics, and that is the job engine that runs specific individual jobs. Those jobs are written in USQL. Now let me show you these products real quick. So I'm going to go back to my portal. And on my dashboard, let's first look at Azure Data Lake Store. So that Azure Data Lake Store is, did it delete? Here I can go to all resources. And here's my Azure Data Lake Store right here. And this is just for files, right? So if I click on Data Explorer, look, I've got folders And if I open up the folders, I've got a CSV for baseball statistics. This is 2016's individual player by team and the number of games they played and the number of home runs they hit and their season batting average and their season on base percentage. And you can see that just stored right in a file. This is just, the first like 24 records, but it's all of them. It's all, 700 some odd players that are in the Major League Baseball. It's all there. And if I wanted to go back here and I wanted to upload a new file, I could just do it in this portal, or I could do it with PowerShell, or there's a .NET .NET SDK that I can use. A lot of different ways that I can get data in here. Okay, once I've got Data Lake Store and a file to use, I can come back here and I can create an Azure Data Lake Analytic account. Inside my ADLA account, I can specify my data source, and you can see that that data store is specified as a data source for my data analytics, my Data Lake Analytics account. Now, I can go look at every job I've ever run here, and I ran a job today testing it, and I want to show you this job right now. So this is USQL. USQL is a combination of SQL and C#, and I can prove that. What I'm doing here is I'm declaring a variable where I'm extracting player name, games, home run, average from that CSV. So it's pulling that Azure Data Lake Store CSV that I showed about you earlier. And it says it's encoded in ASCII, please skip the header rows and store the results in this variable. Now, what's it doing here? It's defining a schema over the CSV at execution, at runtime. This is called schema on read. What are these data types? The int data type and the string data type and the int data type. These are not SQL data types, are they? These are C# data types. Okay, so I take that variable baseball stats and I use it in highest home runs. So I say, okay, go give me the highest home runs from baseball stats and save it in another variable called highest home runs. And look what this is. This is a group by. Doesn't this look like SQL to you? Yeah, it's a lot like SQL. But what's convert.toInt32? That's C#, right? And then I can take highest home runs and I can map the highest home runs back to the original data set, back to baseball stats, in order to get the player name that hit the highest home runs for an individual team. And look, this is a multi-column join. And then I save it as a result variable, and I save that result variable, I output it to the highest home run CSV in my output folder. And then when I click submit job, it just runs this job for me. Now, I actually already know what that file is. Like, it could repopulate that file right now, but if I go back to my Azure Data Lake Store and under Data Explorer, if I'm fast enough, I'm about to overwrite it. Under Output, I can see my highest home runs.csv, and it tells me, like, for the San Diego Padres, that's my favorite team. Where is San Diego Padres? SDG. SDP, here it is, yeah. Will Myers, who's a great player, hit 28 home runs for the San Diego Padres in 2016. So now, another thing I want to show you. So let's go back to Azure Data Lake Analytics, and let's look at that job again. As I go to run it, I can specify my AUs right here. So right now, it's 3 cents a minute because I only want one node to run. But I can go all the way up to like 250 nodes, and it will charge me $8.33 a minute. So I'm specifying my degree of parallelism at the time the job is running, which is very powerful. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So I hope you see by the way, these implementations are both Hadoop. Like Azure Data Lake Analytics is Azure's implementation of Yarn, Hadoop Yarn, which stands for Yet Another Resource Negotiator, over Hadoop. But where Hadoop might be a foreign environment for you, Azure Data Lake Analytics eases your introduction to Hadoop by giving you a SQL-like language along with C# and making it only expensive if you ratchet up the degree of parallelism up, right, for production jobs. Okay, so that's Azure Data Lake. The next product is called Azure SQL Data Warehouse. This is built on SQL Server, and it is only for structured data. So Hadoop and Data Lake is very good for unstructured or semi-structured data. So you can use CSVs or files or NoSQL stores or a lot of different data stores, right? Azure SQL Data Warehouse is really, really good for relational data. It has a product that allows us to get to CSVs called Polybase, but the main engine of Azure SQL Data Warehouse is a tabular, like a relational tabular model. You are charged for the entire cluster for the entire time that it's running. And the degree of parallelism is similar to HDInsight in that you choose it when you create the cluster, not just for when the job is running. So you need to pay attention and carefully select your degree of parallelism when you create the cluster. Unlike HDInsight, though, Azure SQL Data Warehouse has a pause button, and let me show you that. So if I click here, oh, let's go back. I was in the right place. Oh, my mouse is going wonky a little bit. Oh, did I lose my, I lost my portal. Hang on, let me go get my portal back again. It always takes a minute to log in. I put Fiddler on this, and it's like 700 round trips to log into this dashboard. Okay, so from here, my Azure SQL Data Warehouse is, and I thought I had it right up here. I don't see it, so it's probably in my All Resources. Click here, and then here's Azure SQL DW. Where is it? There it is. So it's Ike SQL DW, and if I click on that, you can see that I chose the degree of parallelism that said, please give me 100 data warehouse units. And it will run at that price, whether or not I'm actually physically using it or not. Now, if I pause it, it will stop billing me for the compute time for Azure SQL Data Warehouse. And then I can start it again. That's enormously powerful. That means that I don't have to dismantle my Azure SQL DW infrastructure every single time I'm not using it. I can just pause it, it stops billing, and then restart it again and it starts billing without having to recreate it each time. Once it's there, I can manage Azure SQL Data Warehouse with SSMS. So that cluster is actually right here, Azure SQL Ike, and it's this database right here, Azure SQL DW. And if I right click, I can just open up a new query and I can interact with it just like you'd expect. T1, call 1, int, call 2, varchar 50, and then create the table there. Okay. It's the cloud, so it takes a little bit, but yep, there it is. Now, Azure SQL Data Warehouse is built for analytic workloads. You're only allowed 32 queries running simultaneously at a time. The 33rd query waits. So be aware of that. This is only for creating large data warehouses that are going to grow over time. That parallelism, though, gives you a consistent performance benchmark for interacting with Azure SQL Data Warehouse. If it ever gets too slow, just add more nodes until it speeds up again. Okay. Those are our 3 big data offerings, and hopefully you understand the differences now. HDInsight for Hadoop, Azure Data Lakes for Hadoop, but it's an easier entry because it's USQL and C#, and you're only charged when the job is running. And then Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which is for SQL Server professionals that want to have a big data offering and an MPP, massively parallel processing offering. That's relatively simple. They'll be familiar with that ecosystem. Okay. Last topic is our other topic, and these are products that really don't fit into any specific category. The first is, I'm going to take a breath here and kind of paint the picture. A lot of people have a problem with reporting in that their reports don't add up with each other. So if you go to the average organization, I would say that at minimum, they have 350 reports that they use to manage their organization. And it could be more. It could be 700. It could be 7,000. And if you have 7,000 reports that you're managing, keeping them consistent with one another is almost an impossible task. So if you say, we are changing the way we calculate total sales, and you think, wow, how many reports do I have that have total sales on it? You're not going to get all 100 or 1,000 or however many there are, right? You might get 50% or 80%, but you're going to miss some. And when you miss some, that means that those reports are now inconsistent with each other, and this is a very time-consuming and painful task, and it erodes credibility. So what a lot of people have done is they've created custom aggregate tables. They've let the ETL process, like SSIS, define the calculation. They've said, we're going to store total sales by location in this table. And in ETL, we're going to calculate the total sales for every location. And if that calculation ever changes, we will just change it in ETL. And then they've said, well, as the tables have gotten bigger, it's slowed down. They've had a performance problem. Well, a few versions of SQL Server ago, Microsoft released something called column store indexing, which greatly sped up tables. And what that allowed is for people who were already using aggregate tables to make those aggregate tables really, really fast and make the ETL processes that built those aggregate tables by hand very, very fast. Many, many customers do this. Many organizations do this. It is a slow and painful process, and if the ETL processes fail, they're hard to debug and troubleshoot, and it's a very, very constant maintenance issue. But you can still do it. If you don't want to do aggregate tables, you can use something called analysis services, and there's two versions of analysis services. There's Azure analysis services, and there's SQL Server analysis services. You would use Azure analysis services if you wanted a platform as a service offering. You would use SQL Server analysis services if you wanted to host it on-prem or in an Azure virtual machine. What you do with analysis services is you create the calculations really quickly in a cube, and you deploy the cube and then allow your business users to traverse or browse the cube as a central location of all your calculations. So the cube becomes the de facto gold standard of how calculations are shared, and you can have all sorts of different mechanisms use those cubes. Like you can have Excel or Power BI or SSRS pull data out of those cubes, and you know that data is good because IT has stamped it and said, we have centralized the KPI total sales here in this cube. Like it is absolutely approved by us. And now 1,000 different reports can pull that metric, but it'll always be consistent because they're all pulling it from the exact same place. So I'm going to create a cube for you. And once again, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. Hey, stop it. There we go. Yeah? Oh, we're running out of time? Well, let me show the cube, and then we'll do a Q&A right after that. So, okay. So here I've got this SAS tabular project. And in my model, I am going to actually, let me delete these real quick and pull them back in again so you can see what it looks like. Okay. So this is a blank model in SQL Server Analysis Services. And I can go to my model and I can say, please import from a data source. And it's a SQL Server data source. And I'll say, this is localhost. And the database that I want to import from will be that Wide World Importers data source, and we'll test it. And then I will go ahead and use my IKE account. And then I'll select from a bunch of tables, and the tables I'll select from are all in the sales schema. So customers, order lines, and orders, and I'll finish. And it will import all the data here. And now once I've got the data imported, if I click on my orders tab, I can say, oh, look, in my orders, I have unit price and I have quantity. Oh, actually, order line items. In order line items, I have unit price and quantity. And if I want to create a total, I can just add a new column here. So I'll add the column called total. And what is total? Total is unit price times quantity. And it populates that for me automatically. And if I want to know my total of that, so I'll call that my grand total, I'll say grand total equals sum total. Now I've got a grand total down here. Now I can deploy this and I can use this little model here in Excel or SQL Server reporting services or Power BI. But what I'm going to do is just show you what it looks like in Excel. So Excel connects to that, and now I can see grand total. And if I click on grand total, you can see I did $16 million in sales. And if I wanted to see grand total by customer name, I can just click customer name and see each individual customer's total sales for the duration of the company. Or if I wanted to see it by order date, I can just click, let's see, where is order date? It is right here under orders. And I can say by order date, I can see my sales by date every day, and I can chart this and create an easy pivot table, do all sorts of things with this. So it's very, very powerful. Okay. There are a couple other products. You'll see this in my slides. My slides can be downloaded from my blog. But real quick, data quality services is mostly used for data deduplication to make sure that data that you're importing is clean and you've got right addresses and things like that. Master data services gives you a gold standard for data so that you can enforce data business rules across multiple products and multiple databases. Some tips and tricks for success. First of all, keep all of your projects short. Short projects are successful projects. Second, code for reuse. Try to make a small data mart usable by multiple different business units. I'm a firm believer in auditing. Audit everything. You know how many times I've been asked to create a report, they use that report for 6 weeks and then they never used it again? I think deleting reports is a great thing, and you can only delete reports that aren't used if you audit. Audit ETL, make sure your ETL is performing correctly. If all of a sudden your ETL takes 3 hours to run and you thought it took an hour, it's a really good idea to know when that started to increase and why. Audit data usage, audit performance of all these products. Just make sure you've got a kind of a culture of auditing. Keep the total number of tools down for a while. A very successful project can be done using a limited number of tools. You don't have to use everything all at once. Control your export formats. You can make a organization-wide decision to only export to Excel or only export to PDF. It will make your life a lot easier as you create reporting artifacts. Watch your users, watch what they're doing. Sometimes I like to just sit with users and watch them use the report. If somebody opens up a report and immediately exports it to Excel, I can do that automatically for them. I can give them the report in Excel and save them a step, and sometimes that's very useful. And sometimes ad hoc is good enough. Oftentimes business units think that they've got a major crisis, but really what they have is a temporary crisis. So if you give them some ad hoc data to immediately solve the problem, you might not have to create a cube or create a bunch of reports to solve the problem. Once they get their mind wrapped around what it is, they can solve it quickly without, strong artifacts. And that's it. My name is Ike Ellis. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I wrote a book called Developing Azure Solutions, and I teach a lot of classes for Wintellect. I'm based in San Diego, and I own a software company called Crafting Bytes. And if you want to get a hold of me, here's how. You can tweet me at Ike_Ellis, and my slides will be available. I'll give them to Rachel to distribute, but I'll also put them up on my blog so you can have the slides if you need them. Hopefully, there was some QA, and I just wanted to go through the questions real quick. A bunch of people said yes. Yep. Let's see. Yes, I hear you. I can hear. Good. Yes, we can see. Looks good to me. Yes. Is this the question? Let's see. I don't know that one. Is this the question panel? Yeah. Yep, we're seeing. Okay. Is Data Lake code compatible with SQL Server? No, it is not. You cannot take a SQL Server app and run it on Data Lake. There are a lot of differences. What's the difference between a SAS cube and an ordinary view wrapping at table with extra calculated columns? Views can be slow. SAS cubes are pre-aggregated. You can run that process at night or all throughout the day. So hopefully that answered your question, George, but cubes are very, very fast. Max says, great presentation. Please share the slides. I will. And that's it. If you have any other questions, you can put them in the QA panel right now. The recording will be available to you and sent out to you. And then my slides will be up momentarily. Thanks a lot, guys. Oh, I've got a couple more questions. What's the difference between data lake store and data lake analytics? I think I covered that. And then a bunch of thank yous. Data lake store is to store files. Data lake analytics is the job engine to run USQL jobs. All right, I'm going to sign off, guys. Thanks so much.